What's the E word? It's the E in DEI that everyone ignores, but we're here to bring it to the forefront. Welcome to the E word.
Hey Brittany, how you doing?
Hi, I am well. How about you?
I'm hanging in there. I'm happy to be talking to you about, today's issues again.
Likewise, likewise. I like the blue in solidarity. I appreciate it.
Well, I wanted to start off with you today because I understand you have some very strong feelings about the new affirmative action ruling, and I thought it'd be great to share that.
Listen, Karen, I was gonna say don't get me started, but it's too late. I've
Right.
started.
I did that on
Um,
purpose.
yes. So if you have not heard, there is a lawsuit against Fearless Fund. Have you heard about this?
I've heard about Fearless Fund, but we should talk a little bit about what it is, all right?
Exactly. Yes. So there's this group called the American Alliance for Equal Rights, and they are alleging that Fearless Fund, by offering individual Black entrepreneurs, Black women entrepreneurs, $20,000 grants. It's open only to those. It's called the Fearless Strivers Grant Contest, only open to Black women who are small business owners. Well, the American Alliance for Equal Rights alleges that Fearless Fund is violating their civil rights based on the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And this is an act that states that private contracts must be made and enforced without regard to race. So they say that this fund is violative of their civil rights, and they are suing of all organizations that offer race-based initiatives or grants to entrepreneurs of color. They chose Fearless Fund.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong, but it's the same organization that just won that lawsuit, right, against Harvard and UNC, that struck down affirmative action. And
Yeah,
right. So
that is correct.
Edward Bloom, he's been working on this for, I don't know, over a decade, I think. So he finally got his victory in the court, and now he's moved on to Fearless Fund.
I am very curious to know what Edward Bloom does in his free time other than to
No,
wonder
he's a
about ways to impede entrepreneur and students of color in their pursuit of the American dream. I don't think he does much else other than dream of ways to obstruct that. But yes, Edward Bloom's got a lot of time on his
got a lot of
hands.
focus. And well, it's
Yes.
interesting when someone's so incredibly focused on something, they end up getting results. I mean, this is persistence at its best. I was reading an article about him in the New York Times, right? And just like his philosophy around this whole thing. So he believes that race should not be a factor in any type of decision making. I mean, on face value, I think we all believe that, right? Like,
That would be ideal, right?
that's an ideal situation. And it is ignoring the fact that affirmative action was created to correct systemic inequalities in society, right? According to like a bunch of different factors, though. I think people just focus on affirmative action being just about race when it has so many other um, qualities to it, right? That affirmative action was based around. But the thing that I thought was interesting when I was reading this New York Times article is that while we can agree that things should not be based on race, right? He doesn't believe that there is systemic racism in America. So this is what's fueling, I might be simplifying it, but it's fueling his philosophy around eliminating the race as a factor of decision making.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he chooses to say, yes, these systemic barriers don't exist. So he's ignoring the Fair Housing Act. He's ignoring the subsequent Civil Rights Act of 1964. He's ignoring the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? All of these acts that have been corrective measures because although Edward and I agree, race should not be a factor, nor should gender, color, creed, ability, age. However, we exist in systems that were created without all of these people in mind, right? These systems were designed to advance the initiatives and the focus almost exclusively to the benefit of rich white men.
Mm-hmm.
Rich, white, able-bodied, heterosexual, cisgendered white men.
Yes, we're ignoring all of that.
We're ignoring that piece.
Which is so, I guess I get it, right? Like, everyone's for the most part ignoring that, right? Or at least it needs to be brought more to the forefront. And when it's brought to the forefront, it creates a lot of uncomfortability, which means no one wants to talk about it. And then we go back to ignoring it again. So it creates this weird cycle. But what I found so interesting about the argument is that it might be a legal thing, right? He became very laser focused on that one piece, right? Although, again, affirmative action is about a bunch of different things, gender, economic status, disability, etc. Race was the scalpel, right? That he put a scalpel around race.
Yes.
And apparently it was very effective. It's the most polarizing attribute, right? But it has all these implications. And when asked like what he thought was the remedy, he was like, basically, that's not for me to figure out, Now, it's interesting.
Let me rip everything apart and then everyone else can figure out what to do.
That feels very irresponsible in so many ways. Although, and I'm just playing both sides for a second, right? Although when you are forced to do something because you've gotten rid of a particular tool, you have to create new tools. Does that push society forward? So that's a bigger question. We don't have to answer that today. but I just think that, the precision with which he used race got him where he wants to go. And now he's focused on Fearless Fund. And, I'll posit that, he's focused on this particular firm and not some bigger organization, because it's about achieving these small wins to set precedent, right, for the bigger wins. I think he's just using his playbook all over again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was going to be one of my questions to you, right? Well, first I'll say there's nothing wrong with considering the lens through which someone sees the world, right? As much as I disagree with Edward Blum's actions, I can understand the strategy. I can understand because at first blush, when constructing a straw man argument, right, it's to get something that everyone can really rally around. Yeah. Absolutely. Race shouldn't be considered when it comes to private contracts. That would be fantastic. However, it's important that we consider the context in which Fearless Fund is existing, right? So we see that out of $241 billion in venture capital, Black founders get just 1% of that. And when you focus on Black women receiving venture capital, they don't even get 0.5% of that funding. Okay, and when we think about and compare white founders as opposed to Black founders, taking the gender piece out of it, they receive about $35 million more across the funding cycle than Black founders, than Latino founders, right? Or Latinas. So this idea of there already being an equal playing field and these Black women founders receiving a leg up, it's a farce. But I'll return back to my question, which is, why do you think he chose Fearless Fund?
Listen, I can only speculate because, you know, let's just be real. Fearless Fund is not giving out millions and millions and millions of dollars. They're giving out $20,000 grants 4 times a year to a few people, right? And $20,000 is not the millions of dollars that, let's be real, would give lots of organizations a leg up, right? So why are you coming for this organization? Well, I think, you know, one reason is small wins, okay, because it is small, right? And another reason is, you know, when you are going after something, you attack the most vulnerable, right? I don't know how he zeroed in on Fearless Fund, but I'm just going to focus on my speculation on Black women founders, right? Black women. And in many ways, you know, I don't like to view myself as vulnerable, but in many ways, in the broader scope of things, Black women are the most vulnerable groups in society. And it's very easy to come after them with vigor. And more than likely, they, you know, they'll probably get some support and stuff now, but like probably on face value, they don't have that level of, you know, legal, that team around them that would have been prepared for something like this. So it's really taking advantage in, I think, just one of the worst ways possible. It feels very transparent to me. I would love to hear his argument as to why he selected this, though, and then debate that.
Yeah, so he alleges that a white woman founder approached him, you know, and asked him to save her from the inequities
right there, yeah,
from this grant contest, and alleges that there are 60 founders, both white and Asian, who have complained about the existence of Fearless Fund and the Fearless Fund Strivers grant of $20,000. Now, when I think about the VC landscape, when we think about the numbers, when we think about the founders, my question has been, well, why not look at a Caper Capital, right? Or which has been very loud and very unapologetic in its strategy to support and uplift traditionally under-resourced founders who are, for the most part, Black and brown.
right.
Why not go after them? But as you said, you know, to rack up those wins, going after an organization perceived to be the most vulnerable is quite telling. So then my next question is, and you mentioned, of course, that he's not really sure what happens after, right? He just wants to complete that, and then we move into the next space. So what do you think happens? I will note that this grant is offered in partnership with MasterCard.
Right.
Which has, I'm going to hazard a guess, I don't know for sure, but I would hazard a guess to say they have almost infinitely more resources than
Right.
Fearless Fund. I don't say that to criticize Fearless Fund, but again, it's just the size of the organization, right?
Right.
Do you think this lawsuit, considering how the Supreme Court ruled against the consideration of race when it comes to college admissions, do you think this lawsuit has legs? Do you think this will result in corporations pulling out of these types of initiatives?
Yeah, I don't know what will happen in the court system, but what will definitely happen is organizations, employers, except the workplace, they're going to be thinking about how this is going to affect them long term, right? They're going to be standing up, hopefully they're standing up committees and groups to kind of have this conversation about the legalities of their practices. And this is, I think, a hard debate, right? Like, if you are truly committed to this work, then you have to really start to unpack your organization and really focus on equity. And how do you build equity across these groups? And again, you're losing some tools that kind of helped you along that way. And now you have to build new tools and new competencies within your organization to counter those effects. And that's for organizations that are committed, that they've seen that, diversity, equity, inclusion is a powerful asset to the organization. But as we know, a lot of them are still struggling with some of the basic things. It's like hiring, right? So it's going to be even more of an uphill struggle. I do think that every organization should be looking at themselves internally, regardless of what is available to them, and really trying to push the envelope. If I want to see a silver lining around this, because we have to try, right, is that I'm hoping it will push more innovation. I don't think it needed to be pushed in this way, to be clear, but how will universities, how will workplaces, how will they rethink their role in creating an equitable society? But also on the other side, how do historically excluded groups really use the system as it's been used against them to be used for them, right? So just like these 60 white and Asian women felt like they were, being discriminated against, and they took action. And I don't know the answer to this, right? But are we taking the same sort of actions with the same vigor, right? That they are, right? What do we need to do as a people? And when I say as a people, whatever the groups are and the intersectionalities of those groups, how are we challenging the systems and demanding that type of change?
Yeah, and then of course, I'm going to ask you the marketing question, but I've seen people say, well, why haven't Black and Brown founders done the same thing, right? Why haven't they gone forward and sued VCs and sued other organizations that have excluded them? And it's a good question, but there are two major considerations I don't think people are aware of or, fail to consider. The first of which is, if you are an entrepreneur and you are seeking venture capital funding, it is an incredibly small community. So to sue one VC firm could potentially mean that you're dead in the water for any forthcoming opportunities anywhere else. right? We all know that advancement, as much as we like to think it's about merit, it's largely based on relationships.
Right.
And we see that these relationships are deeply compromised when someone puts forth a lawsuit, right? And so that's one consideration. Additionally, is even if they were to put forth a lawsuit, one would have to prove that the discrimination is intentional.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Those gotcha moments, those moments where the person tells you, hey, we're not looking to be diverse, or we already have one of fill in, this person's ethnic background. Those are few and far between. You're rarely going to get that smoking gun, right? You are going to get situations where you would have to make an inference. And that is often the challenge when dealing with bias, both conscious and unconscious, in the workplace, right? We're not always in complete control of our faculties, but we do have pre-existing beliefs of who is successful, who is a founder, who's marketable, right? Like these things happen. So I think it's important to uplift that. I don't think it's been that Black and brown founders have dropped the ball with these considerations. I think they've weighed the outcomes and ultimately have tried to make their way in an industry that largely has not been supportive of them, much as they've done in many other industries, right? Because people have to survive, right? People want to be able to do what they can, and some have just sought alternate means of funding. But again, the question then becomes, are people truly being treated equally when 99% of the funding goes to white men?
Yeah, and those are two really great points. And the last one in particular around, well, relationship building is always the biggest barrier, right? So I think, again, that there are ways to hopefully help to counter that, but we are a social people, and we rely on referral networks far more than any other medium. But it's about being conscious of that, right? But the second point around intention is so important, because that has always been a major barrier. And maybe what we need, and I'm being very cavalier again in saying this, is a new definition of what discrimination means. Because just because, like you said, people aren't overt, they've learned tactics and tools to either consciously or unconsciously, right? Still discriminate in ways that are less out loud or in your face. So maybe that's something we as a society need to unpack a little bit more and challenge that definition, to include intention. I mean, obviously I'm not in the legal realm, that's your thing, but I watch a lot of like Law and Order and FBI, right? And
we'll take it.
I think there's like some charges around, I'm gonna butcher it, but that involves intent with murder and assault and all type of stuff. So there is some way to measure that for crime, right? This is just a different kind of crime as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean? So I think we could do it.
And so if we borrow that standard from criminal law, right, by the preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, right, all of the evidence that you mentioned, the intent to murder, right? So very rarely are you going to get someone on camera or on, you know, a recording saying, hey, I'm going to harm X person. But what jurors are allowed to consider are Google searches, right? They're allowed to consider, you know, the easy pass, you know, or the traffic, like, you know, the traffic cameras and all of these things, right? So if X person goes missing on Thursday at 7 p.m., they're looking at the defendant to say, okay, well, this person, did they have an alibi? They recently Googled how to get rid of a body, you know, all of these things that more likely than not suggest that something's going to happen, that people are going to kill me because they are going to say, well, murder is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not by the preponderance of the evidence. So it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt, right? That all of this evidence, you know, when considered, it's beyond a reasonable doubt that this person created this space. But if we bring it back to the civil realm, if we bring it back to this lawsuit, and when we think about discrimination, it has to be by a preponderance of the evidence, right? Does it make sense when we look at portfolios, when we look at the pitches, when we look at the feedback from the pitches? Does it make sense? Is it more likely than not that a certain type of founder is being discriminated against? Is it more likely than not that you know, there's some sort of difference being made? So we've talked before about promoter versus prevention questions. So when a founder is doing a pitch, there are two types of questions. There's a promotion question, and that question is really what we would consider a volley, right? It's a question that's meant to highlight this person's knowledge of their industry. It's meant to give them the opportunity to show just how well versed they are.
Right.
Conversely, you have prevention questions, and those are what we commonly think of as a gotcha question, right? Those are the questions meant to humiliate or embarrass, or at the very least, highlight the fact or the belief that this founder is not well-versed in their industry, right? It's a means to uncover what the investor believes, which is that this person is not a leader and should not be leading a company and is not worth investing in. Can you guess which ones women, especially women of color, tend to get more of?
The latter, for sure.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that is it because the businesses that they're creating are so much more different than other people's? Sometimes, but they're present in health and wellness, financial services, ed tech, legal tech, right? They're not speaking to niche markets all the time, right? However, they do look vastly different. Their experiences have been vastly different than other founders, and therefore that raises a flag of alarm to that investor to say, let me see if she really knows what she's talking about. Let me see if, you know, if I can quiz her, and I'm going to ask her this prevention question just to see how well versed she is. That's an experience that people who are not women of color, very rarely have to deal with, right? So that's the difference. So I wanted to get back to the marketing space because I'm curious to know, one, how can companies who have very recently affirmed their commitment to advancing equity within their industries, how can they use this as a marketing opportunity? And through your lens, how can founders use it as a marketing opportunity?
Yeah, I think that it doesn't change the lens, right? Like if you are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, then those are the principles that you're focused on, then they should filter throughout your leadership, throughout your different departments, through marketing, right? So specifically marketing, that should live within your brand and your messaging, right? You should, as it filters down into your campaigns, you really want to be inclusive of the different audiences that you're trying to serve, the ones that you have today and the ones that you want tomorrow. And you should be, celebrating the achievements of your employees, of your customers, all of your partners, and highlighting the areas in which diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, all of the attributes that you have ascribed to in your organization, you should be celebrating them both inside your organization and outside your organization by showcasing that, right? You should be advocates for change, whatever that means, right? You should be engaging your community. There are very specific things you can still do, which people have already been doing around supplier diversity, and you can lean in to a lot of those programs in a meaningful way, because we do know that diversity, right, leads to better outcomes. And so I don't see in this moment, and I'm sure, we kind of dive down into very specific areas, but on a very high level, I don't see where anything changes for your commitments, despite what legal challenges might be out there. And but what is also true across every department, across every organization, for founders, for marketers, is that you need to check your bias, right? And create filters for that or metrics for that. Like, look at the data, analyze yourself. And if you're a fund that caters to everyone, right? Ask yourself, look at your numbers, and if your numbers skew a certain way, ask yourself why. What's happening here, right? And you have to look at everything on a macro level, but also an individual level. So this is a lot of work to do, but it's important work to do. And it's your responsibility to do it, to create economic vitality for all of society, not just certain groups. So I think on a high level, that's my advice, but it's also it's easier said than done. And you also have to walk without fear. Because if you're constantly thinking about what may come down the pike that's going to challenge your efforts, that means you're just being responsive to outside forces when you need to be proactive and committed to your purpose. That makes sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I'm proverbially snapping. Yes, all of this. Yes. Again, it just makes good financial sense, good business sense, right? Investing is all about diversification of your portfolio, because you don't want to overinvest in one area, because that heightens risk, right? So from a space where we're thinking of someone's business acumen, the question then becomes, are you really, really, really willing to lose out on opportunities in wealth generation because of bias?
That is the question. That's the question. I think that's the question we need to leave everyone with. Right? Do you want to miss out on the money because of your bias?
Right. When we're clear that the color that matters most is green, at least within the United States.
There you go. There you go. Oh, Brittany, you know what? I know we could talk about this for hours. All right.
We could.
But And we'll continue, right? We got lots of things to talk about because
we have a lot to talk about. You're absolutely, absolutely, absolutely right. So
until
as always, it's a pleasure speaking with you, Karen.
you too. Until next time.
Until next time, be well.
Be well.